Exploring Bruce Swedien's Acusonic recording process. Let's go. Welcome to the Music Pro, where sometimes we dissect the approaches of production and engineering legends in order to finesse our own recordings. I'm Shea Alexander Wright, and in this episode, we're expanding on one of the most mystified approaches to recording, the Acusonic recording process. Now, the name Bruce Swedien is about as legendary as the names he's best known for working with, Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson. For a long time, the biggest mystery about Bruce was the manner in which he recorded music, a process he called Acusonic. The Acusonic recording process, also known as the quantum range recording process, was the method in which Swedien recorded live instruments and voices in stereo in order to capture a more sonic depth in his multi-track recordings. In this quote from his 1997 book, Recording with Bruce Swedien, as part of his inspiration for recording this way, he refers to How High the Moon by Les Paul and Mary Ford. And I quote, which was a total departure from reality in recorded music. And I think what happened at that point in time, popular music took a left turn away from reality and sound, and we've never looked back. End of quote. So exactly what was the Acusonic recording process? I first discovered Swedien's process when I was 8 years old, reading the liner notes Quincy Jones's album Sounds and stuff like that. In those liner notes, Bruce Swedien spells out exactly what the process was, linking multiple 24-track tape recorders to expand the palette for Quincy Jones to lay down all of his musical ideas. Swedien realized that in doing this, he could actually record things to capture as much natural imagery as possible. You see, Bruce believed that there are three dimensions in sound: left, right, and space or depth, meaning front to back. According to Bruce, stereophonic means solid sound, the ability to recreate a sound source naturally. His philosophy was to think of sound as a sonic reality. Now, there are several videos on YouTube of Bruce actually discussing the process himself, but essentially the process consisted of custom miking and various placement techniques, along with the system he called multiplexing, which allowed him to pre-mix groups of tracks into stereo pairs and on a working tape hub, preserving the original separated tracks for mixdown. Now, thanks to the advent of digital audio workstation today, there's no need for generation preservation due to tape degradation, and we can maintain the organizing efficiency by simply implementing groups in our DAW. It's well known that part of the process was utilizing various distancing options for recording background vocals to simulate choir voices in different positions. But one thing I've always been fascinated by is how he mic'd synthesizers and drum machines in studio live rooms using playback monitors in order to broaden the soundscape of those otherwise sterile and motionless tones. Although I wouldn't know for sure until I was actually able to open up multi-track sessions to a number of his recordings with Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones, I always sensed the ambience through a core roundness that seemed to permeate all the recordings by Swedien himself. And this is particularly apparent in the rhythm section tracks of Michael's song Rock With You from the album Off the Wall. As much as I'd love to play this example, I've opted not to in order to prevent a copyright strike on this channel. Nevertheless, listen to any number of Bruce Swedien recordings with Michael, Quincy Jones, even J-Lo. Listen to the Jennifer Lopez album This Is Me. Swedien recorded and mixed everything except a single track, and the difference in depth and imagery is startling. Flash forward to earlier this year when I was tasked with mixing a record for R&B artist Reggie Jones. The interesting thing about this record for me is that even though the production and recording all originated in my studio, I hadn't really thought of utilizing some idea of Acusonic recording until mixdown. The vibe he was going for was very much a nod to early 80s LA, a la Thriller and Toto 4. Ricky's like a real deal traditional R&B vocalist, a true stylist originally signed to Universal Motown. And what I ended up doing is playing all of the synths and drum tracks through the Studio 2 live room setting on the Sunset Sound Studio plugin by IK Multimedia. I could have just inserted the plugin on each track and then mixed them mix the complete sound through the channel strip. But I chose to take Bruce's approach even further. I bounced down each track through the plugin separately as a synth. I did this for two reasons. One, to have the flexibility of changing the amount of ambience for each sound as I adjusted the mix. And two, to also have that same flexibility for mixing the dry tones without any presence of ambient tracks. I'm gonna play a bit of Ricky's track, which I'll first run the instrumental mix, then mute the ambience tracks, then solo those ambience tracks. Finally, I'll bring in the background vocals, toggling the Sunset Sound plugin as a room verb form. After the demonstration, I'm going to give some thoughts on the process and where I think a lot of Bruce's inspiration for creating the process might have come from after having a conversation with two well-known associates of Bruce's. Now, okay, here's the track. Actually, I'm going to change the meters here to the phase scope. So let's play. Everything is in now. Instrumental, studio tracks, ambient tracks are in. Take the ambience tracks out now. Got the phase scope that will narrow. Ambience back in. Out. Keep the ambience out here. In. Just the ambience. Now let's actually go ahead a bit. Let's take the studio verb out. Without the verb. She's a man eater. In. Should have walked away from her. Okay, so you get a little bit of an idea of how I kind of created this virtual version of the Acusonic process. It beefs up the track a bit, gives it way more dimension and depth. And actually we'll go back to, I'll point out, if you look at this plugin here, this is the Sunset Sound Studio Verb plugin from IK Multimedia. This is the studio, how Studio 2 looks. It could be a bit of placebo effect, but I experimented with moving the 360 view around to see if it would affect the sound at all. And it seemed to me. So I just kind of moved things around based on where I thought it might sound good or feel good in the studio if I was actually playing the drum machines and synthesizers through the loudspeakers in the room. And so it gave me those, that vibe. Now, the only thing that I didn't do in this fashion is the guitar track, which will go back, and I'll solo. It's gonna come up. But as you can see, I used amplitude and just go into the cabinet, This is what I would typically use. I have this in my rig, a Marshall 1936 2x12 cabinet. I've got a 57 on one driver, a U87 on the other driver. I've got U87s for my room or ambience, and they're spread wide. And you can see how those are set. So that's the only thing that I essentially recorded virtually in the fashion that Bruce would be recording instruments during his time using the Acusonic process. Now, I mentioned before that I spoke with a couple of associates of Bruce's. World-renowned arranger and producer Benjamin Wright, who I referred to off the wall, but rock with you earlier. Benjamin actually arranged the strings on several of the tracks on the Off the Wall album, particularly Rock With You and famously, quite famously, Don't Stop Till We Get Enough. But what I asked Benjamin about the string sessions was if he recalled how Bruce mic'd the room, mic'd the strings, and if he actually multi-tracked the strings to get his own mix. And if that was what I was hearing in that track, because on the Rock With You multi-tracks, the strings are not separated. It's just a couple of tracks. It's like two pairs of strings tracks. And Benjamin explained to me that no, they weren't multi-tracked, where each section of the orchestra was separated. Essentially what Bruce did was he went in the room, because of course Benjamin wrote the arrangements, but Benjamin also conducted the orchestra. And so all of the articulations, all of the dynamics were conducted by Benjamin in the performance, and the musicians performed those dynamics and articulations. And so what we hear in terms of all of that stuff from the strings is exactly how it was performed. So as it was explained to me, Bruce essentially mic'd the string section and mic'd the room based on what he was hearing being performed in the live room of the studio. And that's how he captured it. And if you listen to those strings, even in the mix, you can hear how much depth, how much dimension, how much vibe there is around those strings. So that's one thing that I kind of had settled in terms of the mystery of the Acusonic recording process for the strings, with someone I know who knew Bruce very well and worked with him very closely. Now, the other person I spoke with is an unsung hero of audio engineering, a brother named Reggie Dozier. Reggie, a lot of things that you hear, a lot of practices that you know of in modern recording, I'm pretty sure were brought about by Reggie himself. If you guys are familiar with Bruce's history, his history goes back to the Midwest where he's from, and particularly his career starting in Chicago, particularly the high level part of his career beginning in Chicago. Reggie Dozier was one of those guys that was in Chicago and Detroit at that time as well. Bruce was recording a lot of R&B music in Chicago at that time. And to my understanding, cats like Reggie, particularly or specifically Reggie, hipped him on how to record R&B music, particularly when it came to incorporating the strings and the winds and stuff like that for these elaborate arrangements and productions that were going on. So it occurs to me that a lot of the inspiration for Bruce's Acusonic recording process comes from really those guys in Chicago figuring out how to maintain a lot of how they recorded strings or instruments in general back then into the multi-track recording process, because things were so separated and isolated, and you had so much flexibility with recording and mixing and so on and so forth. I think Bruce took it to another level though. But, essentially when they started out, it was 1-track mono recording, and then eventually 2-track stereo recording, and 3 tracks, and then 4 tracks, and on and on. But particularly between the mono, the stereo, and the 3 tracks, mixing was essentially miking and positioning. And so, at the end of the day, a lot of what those guys were doing, and then Bruce taking it to another level, was taking those performances, capturing that magic and the vibe of the room and space that had everything to do with those performances too, getting that onto multi-track tape where you could manipulate volume and tone and stuff like that. So that's my piece on it. Actually, at some point later, I am going to have Reggie Dozier on to talk about his entire time recording. Reggie is still very active in the studio today and very hip. We talked a couple of weeks ago, and he hipped me to some things that I didn't have any idea about. But he really is a genius engineer, and if you're not hip to him, it's time to get you hip to him. Look, I'd love to know you guys' thoughts on this. I'd love to know if you have incorporated or been incorporating some shape, fashion, or form of the Acusonic recording process yourself, if you're so hip. If you've been doing it like really and truly with hard miking and utilizing space, or if you've been doing it virtually as I did in this instance with Ricky Jones's record. I'd like to know if maybe you're doing something else along these lines that aren't necessarily the Acusonic recording process, or chasing the Acusonic recording process, but doing something to sort of liven your tracks up, to bring some more life and dimension to your recordings, aside from implementing other gear or tonal sonic plugins and whatnot. So leave it in the comments. Another episode's coming up soon. Until next time, I'm Shay Alexander Wright. Thank you guys for tuning in.